The Babylon Project was our last best hope for Scott. A self-contained podcast, 1 hour long, located on the internet. A place of fun and discussion for Babylon 5 fans everywhere. A shining beacon in cyberspace, all alone in the night. It was the dawn of the 20th anniversary of Babylon 5, the year the Great War to free Bab 5 came upon us all. This is the story of the last of the Babylon podcasts. The year is 2014. The name of the place is the Babylon Project Podcast.
This is Maggie Egan, your ISN news anchor, and you're listening to the Babylon Project podcast. Thanks for listening.
Hi there, Babylon 5 fans. This is Raul and Jim with the next exciting episode of the Babylon Project podcast. Tonight, we are looking at the war prayer. So how are you doing tonight, Jim?
Doing real well. Getting my house sited. I'm doing it myself.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
I've finally got my voice back. I spent, excuse me, you'll be hearing a few of these odd coughs in and out. Folks, I'll try and edit them out so your ears don't get busted. But 3 days of running the rifle range for a Cub Scout day camp, teaching them to shoot BBs. 6-hour stretches. You know, imagine band camp having to yell over the trombones.
Oh, yes.
Or to keep your percussion corps in civil order.
Percussion and order don't go together. If you have ordered percussion, it just doesn't work. They kind of do their own thing.
Yeah, I was crossing my fingers and hoping I'd be talking by the time of this podcast.
Time out. Your teacup is directly in front of the camera.
Oh, sorry about that, my friend. I've got my Earl Grey folks with me just to make sure I keep talking tonight. So, War Prayer. Interesting title for this particular episode, I think.
Yeah.
This title is actually from a Mark Twain story called The War Prayer. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but this was actually a story that wasn't published during his lifetime. His friends, his family, his publisher all told him, no, you cannot publish this. It is too dark. Straczynski, of course, likes to pull in elements of literature throughout the series. And in fact, he makes a note that this is a story which should be read by everyone. So hang on after the credits. I think we will be able to get a reading of it. It is a public domain story, so you can look it up yourself easily, but it's worth reading. It contrasts, when a congregation, you've seen with wars, and especially some of the really bloody conflicts, messy wars of a century ago. When you're praying for victory, the thing to keep in mind is that there's the other side. And when you're wanting your boys to win, what are you asking God to do to the other side?
Mm-hmm.
And Twain spells it out in very graphic detail.
Yes, he does. And however, that is a double-edged sword.
Yeah, really.
Because the side that's saying the prayer believes that the Almighty is on their side, and the other side also believes that the Almighty's on their side.
Yeah, what happens if he's not on your side? Oh,
exactly.
Oh gosh. Well, it is a good title for this episode, particularly when you think about Home Guard and the kind of hate and just flat out evil that they're spewing out. This is just such a dense episode. And in my opinion, this is one of the denser episodes. Even with all the lightheartedness of the two Centauri kids, it's just an incredibly dense episode. So it's going to take us a while to unpack it, and I know we will not be able to pull everything out of there that's able to be pulled out in a mere hour of time.
Right.
This is one I'm definitely going to count on feedback from our listeners to fill in some of the gaps that we might miss. Let's go ahead and get our grounding with an episode summary, episode synopsis. Take it away, Jim.
All right, here it is.
Archive. Access. Initiated.
In the opening scenes of War Prayer, Delenn visits with a friend, a Minbari poet named Shal Mayan. They decide to call it a night, and Mayan heads back to her quarters. On the way, Mayan is attacked and stabbed in the abdomen, and her forehead is branded with the symbol of an Earth anti-alien hate group. She is left bleeding on the deck. The only thing the attackers said was, "Stay away from Earth, freak." Later, Delenn confronts Sinclair and Garibaldi, calling the attack an outrage. Sinclair promises to get to the bottom of it. Delenn says that anyone should be able to walk in the green sector of the station. Sinclair says that they are doing their best, but Delenn tells him that he has to do better. Garibaldi explains that there is a growing anti-alien movement that is not only on the station, but it is also happening on Earth and on the Mars colony. He suspects that it is a group called the Home Guard. Sinclair declares that he will not tolerate that behavior on Babylon 5. G'Kar approaches Sinclair and warns him that if any such attacks happen to any Narns, there will be retribution. In turn, Sinclair tells G'Kar that any disruption on the station will be dealt with. Under the watchful eye of Dr. Franklin, Garibaldi questions Mayan about her attackers. She tells him that she couldn't see anything until they were upon her, that they were like shadows. Garibaldi leaves to continue his investigation. Franklin offers to remove the brand from Mayan's forehead, but she refuses to have it removed. Ivanova is in the docking bay awaiting two Centauri detainees that will be discussed later. She also meets Malcolm Biggs, a former acquaintance that she pretty much blows off, stating that she is on duty. Meanwhile, Garibaldi interrogates a suspect in the Mayan stabbing named Roberts. Roberts was caught with a knife, which is not allowed on the station. Further, the knife has blood on it. When asked about this, Roberts makes no effort to hide his bad feelings about aliens, but tells Garibaldi that the blood on the knife was his own from an accident he had opening a crate. Garibaldi suspects that he is part of the Home Guard and orders the blood on the knife checked for DNA. Alone in her quarters, Ivanova prepares to go on duty and hears something at her hatch. When she opens it, there is a package there with a single rose and a note inside. Sinclair asks Garibaldi about his findings on Roberts. Apparently, as far as the knife was concerned, Roberts was telling the truth. Garibaldi tells Sinclair that he was released but remains under red-level surveillance. He also tells Sinclair that there are fights breaking out all over the station over the alien attacks. Sinclair tells him that that is what the hate groups want, everyone fighting with everyone else to reinforce their position. Ivanova and Biggs arrive at the Fresh Air restaurant for a nice dinner. They discuss their past relationship, and Ivanova recounts her military career. She obviously has no regrets where Biggs is concerned. He wants their relationship to move forward and says that he is intending to open a business on the station. Sinclair and Garibaldi are called to a disturbance on the station. They arrive to find G'Kar rallying a number of the alien population, telling him that the Earth people are attacking the alien races. When confronted by Sinclair, G'Kar reminds him that there have been no less than 8 attacks on the station over the past several days, and no arrests have been made. Garibaldi convinces Sinclair to leave the area while he puts an end to the protest. In the meantime, in another part of the station, Roberts is beaten senseless by 3 aliens. Ivanova and Biggs arrive back at her quarters after dinner. It is obvious that Biggs is putting the moves on her. but they are interrupted by a call back to duty from Sinclair. Garibaldi tells Sinclair that the near riot has been averted and also informs him about the incident involving Roberts. They watch a surveillance tape of Biggs visiting Roberts in the infirmary recovering from his beating. It is obvious that Biggs is recruiting Roberts for the anti-alien group that he is with. This comes as a disgusting surprise to Ivanova. Sinclair cooks up a plan in which he will appear to also be an anti-alien and to introduce himself to Biggs. Sinclair knows that groups like that love to have people in high places with them. Ivanova agrees under the condition that when the arrests are made, she is present. Later, at a reception, Delenn introduces Sinclair to a delegate from ABBA 4. Sinclair begins to put on his act while Biggs observes. When the delegate brings up her concerns over the attacks, Sinclair blows her off, saying that the situation is being handled. Sinclair moves over to where Biggs is and begins spouting anti-alien rhetoric. Back in his quarters, Sinclair, Biggs, and Ivanova discuss the Earth-Minbari War. Biggs listens while Sinclair continues to feign anti-alien rhetoric, and Biggs spouts some of his own as well. Biggs offers to introduce Sinclair to his associates as a way to become part of their group, but tells him that there will be a demonstration of his sincerity at the meeting and will send a message to the alien population. Later, Ivanova tells Sinclair that the meeting has been set up, but not where it is to take place. They are to meet Biggs at the Zocalo, unarmed, and will be taken to the meeting from there. Sinclair, Ivanova, and Biggs arrive in a cargo bay for their meeting. 3 or 4 others materialize while everyone watches. They are Biggs' associates who are wearing a new blacklight camouflage that renders the wearer virtually invisible. Further, Biggs orders a jamming device activated so no one can eavesdrop on their proceedings, as Garibaldi was doing. As soon as the jamming signal starts, Garibaldi and his troops are on the move. Biggs explains that their plan is to assassinate all of the ambassadors on the station at the same time as that takes place on Earth. He tells Sinclair that he wants to be sure that he helps them get off the station as soon as possible after the assassinations. In the way of a loyalty test, Biggs has the delegate from ABBA 4 brought in. Sinclair is supposed to kill her. Before anything can happen, one of Biggs' associates detects a large number of people headed towards a cargo bay, and a firefight ensues between Sinclair, Ivanova, and Biggs' group. Biggs' people are taken out, and Ivanova stops Biggs from shooting Sinclair in the back. Garibaldi and his troops arrive and take them all into custody. Soon after, Biggs and his associates are put onto a transport under guard to be returned to Earth for trial. Biggs stops to exchange words with Ivanova, who tells him that she never knew him. In a subplot, 2 teenage Centauri children, Arya and Karen, are brought to the station. They are being held for having stolen credit chips. The 2 are under the impression that Vir is the ambassador on Babylon 5, which comes as quite a surprise to Londo, who soon arrives on the scene. When Londo questions them, he learns that they are running away from home to be married to each other and not to live up to their obligations to follow through with their arranged marriages on Centauri Prime. Londo tries to explain that arranged marriages are a way of life for the Centauri and that it helps to bring together the great houses and keep the peace, but the 2 are in love and could not care less about tradition. After talking with the Minbari poet Mayan, Londo realizes that he has gotten older and has concentrated more on his career and has forgotten what it is like to feel affection for someone else. As a result, he arranges for Arya and Karen to be returned to Centauri Prime under the care of a relative who will see to it that the 2 are married when they are of legal age, and after they have been instructed on the ins and outs of what it means to be a Centauri. In another seemingly unrelated subplot, Sinclair goes to see Kosh to inform him about the attacks on non-humans and to ask for his help. Kosh refuses to help, saying that the Vorlons are not interested in others' affairs. All the while, there is a video screen in the background playing scenes from Earth's history. When Sinclair asks him what he is doing, he simply says that he is studying and doesn't elaborate any further.
Initiating plot analysis.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Good as always.
Thank you.
I think the starting point here is just going to be, you've mentioned a fairly crowded guest cast on this episode.
Yeah, there's quite a number of guest stars. One very notable one would be Tristan Rogers playing Malcolm Biggs.
Right.
Apparently a former love interest of Susan Ivanova.
Yeah.
Trying to find his way back.
Let's just say Susan's track record with relationships keeps on its normal track. Now, this guy, we might not recognize ourselves, but he does have a fairly significant background. He's done an awful lot of soap opera. If you're into, especially General Hospital, you'll recognize who he is, Robert Scorpio. Yep. And I know The Bay, Young and Restless, a whole lot of Bold and Beautiful, a whole lot of other work. So at least in the soap opera circuit, the guy's got a pretty hefty reputation.
Yeah.
Who else?
Nancy Lee Gran, who played Shal Mayan, the Minbari poet.
Mm-hmm. Another big soap opera star.
Oh, see, I'm not familiar with her.
That's what IMDb is for, my friend. I'm cheating.
Uh-huh.
I'm unabashedly cheating.
We had Michael Paul Chan as Roberts. He was suspected of attempted murder. Turned out it wasn't him, after all.
Mm-hmm.
Rodney Eastman is Kieran Murray. Did I say that right?
I believe, yeah. Kieran Murray.
Mm-hmm. And Danica McKellar as Arya Tensis.
And that is actually the most well-known name of the bunch. In fact, a very well-known name.
Right. And Kieran and Arya are Centauri. Roberts is human, Biggs is human, and as I mentioned before, Shal Mayan is Minbari. So we had quite a mix in here this week.
Yep. Real quick, just regarding Danica, my wife had not noticed the credits before, and she caught me on my rewatch preparing for the show. And I looked at her, you know who that is, don't you, Anthea? It's like, who? I told Danica McKellar. She's like, what? No. Yeah. Winnie from the Wonder Years.
Okay, now I got it.
Yeah, that yes. Winnie from the Wonder Years.
Okay. Well, see, this is going to sound really bad, but all the young Centauri women look alike to me.
Oh.
I mean, that's horrible. I realize that, but they do. But now that you mention it, yes, I do recognize her from that show.
Well, when you get around, yeah. Okay, no, you said young Centauri woman. I was going to say, when we get to meet Pestilence, Famine, and Death, not War, this is where our little goof from several episodes back.
Yeah.
But, no, I actually caught that on the mix down. I was like, oh, crud, we got that completely backwards.
We're all human here, right?
Yep, and we've got, and our fans are good.
Yes.
Anyway, this is an episode with, like I said, a lot to unpack. You had mentioned the two young Minbari. There's actually three stories here. There's the two young Minbari.
Right.
There is Malcolm Biggs and Susan Ivanova.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got the whole home guard. You want to go after the home guard first?
Yeah, let's start with the home guard.
Yeah, start with the dark and let's end on a light note then with the two Centauri. Though I'll tell you what, there's a really heart-wrenching moment with the Centauri.
Yep.
So we've got Delenn, as your synopsis told us, Shal Mayan, seems like one of her oldest friends, someone she knew from childhood. She was a Membari song poet that performs tila, which are poem songs that attempt to recall the old memories and prompt new ideas, as she puts it.
Mm-hmm.
And walking back to her quarters, she is attacked. She's stabbed. Thank God Membari are tough.
Yes.
And branded, as you said.
Yes, and she's branded with a very strange symbol.
Yep. It's a combination of the old symbols for man and woman.
Yes.
And it's the signature logo for something called the Home Guard.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Home Guard, I guess what's the best way to describe them? The KKK of the 23rd century?
Yeah, I would say more like isolationist activists. They want Earth for Earth only.
Right.
So in other words, the prejudices that have gone on in the past and go on now are no longer racial, but they are species based.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's a real good way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
We really see that put out in its, I almost said ugliest, but I'm going to not say that yet. I wait till we get, frankly, I think the ugliest was Malcolm Biggs.
Yeah.
But the most in-your-face offensive was out of Roberts.
Yes. However, he was talk.
Mm-hmm.
He was, he was not Home Guard.
No, he wasn't. He was who Home Guard recruits, though, for their dirty work.
Right. However, they really do like to recruit people in high places.
Just as often, yes.
To give them more credibility.
And, in a way, this is where my KKK comparison kind of comes in, because that was exactly what they had done. They recruited, for lack of a better phrase, Bubba in the fields to do the bloody work, to get messy.
Mm-hmm.
Basically to be the ones who take the blame, and they put a lot of effort into snagging people in Congress in those early days.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was very bad. And this episode is very much reminiscent of those feelings.
Yes.
I can remember at my age, the race riots, Watts. I can remember seeing on television the atrocities in the South, the black and white films that you see in newsreels and historical things. I lived through some of that.
I actually did more than live through it. I lived it. You might, obviously from my name, I'm Hispanic, Mexican. My grandfather immigrated in from Mexico many, many, many years ago.
Uh-huh.
And at age 50, and you'll have to forgive me, my friend, for getting a little preachy here, but I remember being run out of the Cub Scouts because they didn't want Mexicans in our particular den. I've been physically spat upon. My wife, it was funny because I had kind of warned her of some of, what was involved, but my wife, a few days after that, she didn't believe me at the time, came back. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. One of my mom's friends actually asked her if she was okay with her daughter marrying one of them.
Oh.
So I've lived it firsthand.
See, and as I grew up, I could not understand it because where I went to school, We had, you name it.
Yeah.
Whatever. And we played together. We lived in the same neighborhood. We all went to school together. I don't remember any of that kind of thing where I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite a shock for me when we moved halfway across the country to Minnesota, and I heard how frequently and how freely people would use the N-word.
Yeah.
I was shocked. Okay. And as now I got to gather my thoughts again. The way I was raised, that word was a bad word.
Yeah. That's the same for me. My father was Mexican. My mother was Scotch, Irish, and Dutch English.
Uh-huh.
So Scotch, basically Scottish and Irish. Last name Kilmer. And yes, I inherited the way I like to talk about it, at least from temperament. I got the hot side of both.
Yeah.
So, from that background, I was raised very much in exactly that same manner.
I have to honestly say, though, that I am pleased to see that things have changed over the years.
Yeah. In some way, actually, yeah. Not just in some ways, in a whole lot of ways, they've changed a whole lot. I could not imagine people getting bent out of shape and offended by imagined slights the way they do today.
Right.
Where apology, especially when you've had to live through some of the things that I've had to in that regard, where that kind of bigotry is concerned. It's the lack of thin skin is utterly shocking to me on a personal level.
Yeah.
And that is actually one of the things that I like about this episode, because Mayan's approach is like, she could have the brand removed. And I mean, it's a brand on her head. And
right.
she refuses to have it removed as an object lesson.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that was, JMS, you get it. You understand it.
Yes. But this thing has reared its ugly head again.
Mm-hmm.
Bigotry. Yeah.
And one of the things I noticed about the Home Guard, so they've got some pretty high-tech gear.
Oh, yeah.
They've got gear, the black light cloaks.
Yeah, those cloaking suits that they have are quite incredible.
There's some definite upstairs support for what they're doing. And in fact, as we find out later on, that's something that, not President Santiago, obviously, but the person who eventually becomes president of the Earth Alliance has been feeding and fostering for his own purposes.
Yes.
What is interesting, this is the first time we really see this. Except for, I'm not going to count the gathering, the event with her in Jakar. But this is the first time we really see Delenn pissed.
Yes. Yeah.
She tears into Sinclair, and that's supposed to be her friend.
Yeah. Well, she feels like nothing's being done when, when a poet is attacked in a corridor.
Right. And remember, she's considered a national treasure.
Yes.
Again, one of her oldest friends. One of the things I'm wondering about Delenn is, did Sinclair ever come in and really kind of fill her in on what was going on? Because when he and Ivanova start to set up Malcolm, he's pretty uncivil almost to some of the other ambassadors, at least compared to his regular treatment of them.
Yes.
And enough that... No. Go ahead.
Yeah, he has to put on a good act to be convincing in order to infiltrate this group.
Yeah.
But, even though he was putting on an act, it made me extremely uncomfortable to watch him.
It did. It did very... And the shock on Delenn's face when he just brushed her off with Mila Shar. That was the part of it that really made it the most uncomfortable. I will say that on the flip side, Susan Ivanova just can't pull it off. I'm surprised she didn't blow the whole sting.
She spent an awful lot of time observing and standing in the background, and she didn't offer a whole lot.
But even when she did, it was so forced that it was almost, it was almost comic. It was perfect. I mean, it certainly described and fit the character, particularly after just getting some emphasis on her Jewish nature, her Jewish background. So you really, she was sort of the contrast to Sinclair's act, I think, in a way.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that she's been told all the stories of the way that Jews have been treated over the millennia.
Yep.
Part of her role was to sit and look at Malcolm and say, I cannot believe this guy.
Yeah, that's a real good segue to the second part of the story. Malcolm, Susan. Here's the question. Why do you think he came to Babylon 5?
Well, I think he was looking for probably just branching out, fresh ground, for number one. And number two, he saw an opportunity perhaps to get back together with Susan.
Yeah, so you think it was both?
I think more Susan just happened to be stationed there. I think Biggs would have gone there anyway.
Right. Of course, with his big plot, the killing of all 4 ambassadors.
Yeah. Well, and then not only that, but, being a place where all the aliens are going to come together and meet, would be, in order to get the humans on his side, would be huge.
Right. Right. It would definitely give him a huge in.
Now, from my point of view, if I were home guard and recruiting, Babylon 5 would probably be one of the last places I would go. Because a person would think that the upper echelon officers would be chosen because they do not have those prejudices. And who among all of the officers would have more reason than Sinclair to have those prejudices against alien races after what he went through, which we are yet to find out about.
I believe that is that next episode or the episode after?
Nope, that is the next episode.
That is the next episode. And don't forget, he's got Clark, Malcolm's got Clark's support.
Yeah.
We don't know that now, but as the story progresses, I think, is this the only major... I mean, Home Guard keeps coming back again and again.
Yes.
But is this the only really Home Guard focused story?
To my recollection, that would be correct.
I think it is. One important question that the whole Home Guard story does finally address is Kosh and his hands. Remember when we were talking about the gathering, there was some question about, what was this hand? How did he get slapped with a hand with the countersuit? And the question sort of becomes, does he even need the encounter suit? Is that just a way for him to hide? And what is he hiding? What do you see when you crack the shell of a Vorlon's encounter suit?
Yeah.
That was the big question on the discussion boards on Usenet back in those days.
Yeah. You know what? My conclusion is that if you were to crack open an encounter suit for a Vorlon, you would see exactly nothing more or nothing less than what they want you to see.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was one of the theories. That was definitely one of the theories floating around. What we do know so far, we've heard the wing flappy sound. So it seems like they can fly and move pretty fast. They seem to glow for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
They've got some sort of hand or some other appendage. And they've definitely got some really cool technology.
Yes.
Sinclair loved that viewer. Yeah, they've got some really cool technology. And pretty much everything that comes out of their mouth is a mystery wrapped in an enigma.
Yes.
To paraphrase the old quote. In fact, this is, I think, probably one of the longest dialogues I've seen with Kosh to this point.
Well, I wouldn't exactly call it a dialogue. Kosh would be the most boring interview in all the universe, you know.
Boring? No. Maddening? Definitely.
Yeah. I remember a long time ago, I was listening to Larry King.
Uh-huh.
This is when he had his radio show before he was on CNN or anything. And he was interviewing Demon Wilson from Sanford and Son. He was the son on Sanford and Son. And Larry would ask the guy a question, he'd go, yes. And then Larry would ask him another question, he'd go, no. And for years, Larry King would talk about that as the worst interview he ever had because all he got was one word answers. That would be Kosh.
Well, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and play back that exchange.
Okay.
Here it is.
Ambassador Kosh, I hadn't heard from you, so I thought I'd make sure you'd been informed. There have been several recent attacks on non-humanoids. We are conducting a thorough investigation and hope to have it wrapped up soon.
Good.
Meanwhile, it might be helpful if you spoke with the other ambassadors.
We take no interest in the affairs of others.
Well, I hope you'll reconsider. If you could give us a hand,
Yes?
Nothing. You'll respect your wishes. That's quite a viewer. I've never seen anything quite like it before. What is it?
Efficient.
Those are images from my world. If I may ask, what do you...
I am studying.
Studying what? Ambassador?
Yeah, that's... I love the way the interview ends. Kosh just kind of shuts down.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't have to explain himself. He knows it.
And he never does. Well, there's a couple of points where he does eventually. But...
Well, there's an episode now. He says, "We take no interest in the affairs of others." Okay, that's his answer now. Wait a couple of episodes. Oh, he takes a big interest in the affairs of others.
Yeah. Yeah. But, I mean, just even a few lines down, we take no interest in the affairs of others. And then he's studying Earth and Earth history, and those were images of all major Earth events.
Yeah.
That sure looked like interest to me.
Well, I wonder how much of what Kosh does he does to observe the reactions of others.
I think part of it. I think that's definitely part of it.
Yeah.
In fact, I think that, that's a big part of why he's there. He certainly isn't getting involved in the activities of Babylon 5.
No, not very often. And he makes sure he keeps himself well isolated.
Mm-hmm. So he's definitely watching, and one could go as far as saying waiting for something.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're jumping ahead to season 2, which my son is getting frustrated with the every 2-week release of our show. So he's binge watching. He's binge watched his way through season 1. Anyway, one of the things that was just in general with Kosh is what ended up being called the Koshisms. that made for a great deal of speculation on pretty much anything that would happen. If nothing else, this here made it clear that what we saw in Mind War, as far as the way Kosh communicates, wasn't an accident at all.
No. He was put there to make sure that we had questions.
Yes, that is definitely true, and we'll get to we'll definitely get into some of that.
Should we move on to the storyline with Kieran and Arya?
I think we've pretty much folded Malcolm and Susan into the home guard discussion.
Yeah.
Except to say that gal just has the worst luck in relationships that I've ever seen.
Yeah, she always seems to take up with bums, except for one.
Yeah, well, look what happens to him.
Yeah, well, he's a good guy.
That is true.
But that's a discussion for another night.
Yep. By the way, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there is a short story that addresses that. That's official canon.
Aha.
We'll get to that in a couple seasons.
Sounds good.
But yes, the second part of the story, Kieran and Arya.
Yes, they arrive on the station. We find out that that Arya is related to Veer, if I'm not mistaken.
Ambassador Kato. Let's get it correct.
Yeah. And we're very much surprised when they found out that Veer was not the ambassador.
Nope. At least, yeah. Nope. And
Londo was quite surprised to find out that Veer was the ambassador.
That was actually what I was that's what I was about to say.
Anyway, these two are star-crossed lovers who are going against the Centauri tradition.
Of arranged marriages.
Yes. They want to marry because they are in love, which just sends Londo through the roof. And he says, what does he say, Raoul?
Love? What does love have to do with marriage?
Exactly.
And this is where he starts flashing the picture of his 3 wives.
Yes, all 3 of them, who he credits for sending him far out into the stars.
75 light years away.
Yes.
Oh my! Now we will actually meet them. I believe next season.
Yeah, they do come around, and they're quite the crew.
Yep, pestilence, famine, and death.
Yes,
not war.
Not war.
I'll never be allowed to live that one down. I know.
Oh
gosh.
Nah, we're all here.
Oh my! But yeah, unfortunately, they end up victims of the Home Guard attack as well, as you noted.
Yeah, Kieran was injured very badly.
PPG blast, point blank.
Yeah, he was in a coma.
Mm-hmm.
Londo tried to talk Arya into leaving him alone because she couldn't do anything about it.
Right.
And that's when my aunt stepped in and explained some things and caused Londo to realize something that he had forgotten.
And, you know, this particular episode, when I say it's dense and has a lot to unpack, you're going into one of the areas, even more than the home guard, I think. Mayan's comment, all sentient beings are defined by their capacity and need for love.
Yes,
And
which Londo has completely forgotten.
And in fact, he completely poo-poos and brushes her off.
Yes.
Until a little later when Veer finds him sitting alone, almost in tears, in the Zen garden.
Yes. And he discovers that his shoes are too tight, and he has forgotten how to dance.
And, of course, Veer doesn't understand it. He doesn't get what Londo's talking about. No. And Londo's response to that is just as wrenching, nor should you.
Right. No, Londo is self-described as an old Republican who is trying to
in the Roman sense, not in the U.S. sense.
Right. He's been trying to climb the ladder socially, politically, and he always seems to miss the mark.
Yeah. And that's part of the tragedy of the character, because what he really wants is to do what's best for Centauri Prime.
Yes.
And he just makes bad choice, bad decision, big mistake, one after another.
Well, and not only that, but we see here in this episode, and we'll see in future episodes, that he is capable of great compassion.
In fact, that's how he deals with it. Like you said, he fosters the kids with one of his own relatives, one of them who still has a lot of influence and a lot of power, in fact.
Yeah. But he likes to bluster, and he likes to be loud and demonstrative, but he really is not a completely bad person.
No, in fact, he's not a bad person at all. He's more, like I said, just unfortunate in his choices. And we see that when he, with his comment that children should be allowed to dance.
Yeah. I wonder what he was like when he was young.
One wonders. That seems like he's probably had a bit of a rough childhood, though.
Yeah. Because we've seen his capacity for passion when it come to Adira.
Yeah.
And he demonstrated that in the way that he was right there to forgive her for stealing files that could have brought down the Centauri government.
And just that he would be so willing, especially after War Prayer, when you see the importance they place on status. The marriage, it's so politically based, it's so calculated for him to be so open about being seen with her. This kind of puts even deeper context on that.
And if you recall, Adira didn't know if she should be seen in public with him. And he was the one who said, forget it. We're going out to dinner.
But on the flip side, he turns around, for as comic as he is, there's just almost a deep depression to the character in some ways.
Yeah.
I know Straczynski has described it, the Babylon 5 as, in a lot of ways, basically Londo's story.
I could see that.
And you see that in how he opens the voiceover for The Gathering, and, well, just all of Season 5, at least the Londo part, the Centauri Prime part of that Season 5 story.
Now, time out a second.
Sure thing.
Is Jakar in this one?
Oh, yeah.
He makes that big speech, doesn't he?
Yeah, Jakar is absolutely in this. His response to his opinion of the attacks is in the same line of thought as Delen's. However, his approach to solving it is very, very different.
Right.
Rather than Delenn dealing with Sinclair and dealing with it firmly, G'Kar pretty much is inciting a riot, and I mean, let's face it, with his kind of vigilante approach, that's what leads to Rogers getting the crud beat out of him.
Yeah, it's almost as though G'Kar is adopting the same methods as the Home Guard and turning it around.
Very much so.
Yeah. But he doesn't believe that. We know this.
Well, at least the more matured G'Kar.
So what would be his motivation behind doing this?
I think in this case, it's simply his inherent pettiness, his hope and desire to turn anything to his advantage. It puts him in a better position as far as his influence amongst the League worlds.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's the only one of the major races of the the 5 major races that's really saying what clearly all the League world members are thinking.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, he's giving the ear. I mean, the Drazi, which take a more typical Drazi violent approach. The rep from Abba 4 that Sinclair saves, Mila Shar. She's saying much of the same and has much of the same concerns as G'Kar. So, he's given a voice. It's gaining him influence.
I wonder what Sinclair would have done had they not discovered Garibaldi and the cavalry coming over the hill.
I'll make a guess, and it's just based on. I think I'm just basing on the way his stance had shifted.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, he was not going to shoot Mila Shar, but it looked like he was ready to go after. He was shifting, I think, to take the grab at the PPG.
Uh-huh.
I think he would have done much the same as he did, maybe with a little more surprise, maybe with a little less surprise, and just crossed his fingers and prayed that he got the cavalry there in time.
Well, we all know his penchant for taking big risks.
Yep. Yep. That's, I mean, he had Susan with him. Of course, they were both unarmed, but, speaking of which, in that little, I like Susan's almost Dirty Harry response. Give me a reason.
Mm-hmm.
She might as well have said, "Go ahead, make my day."
Go ahead, make my day. Well, Raul, I think we've kind of talked this one pretty well thoroughly through.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very detailed episode and very difficult to get everything in just an hour.
Yep. I think the only thing that is missing is in discussing Kosh's poisoning. What? They bring up the same question that we brought up a few weeks ago. Was Kosh even poisoned? But Dr. Kyle was transferred back to Earth, and Lita was transferred a week after that. So the only 2 people who knew anything real about the Vorlons are gone.
Yes.
That's the main thing left that I would have had on my list of notes to mention.
Yeah.
I would be hard-pressed to put a likes and dislikes to it, because this was a hard episode to really separate the pieces out.
Yeah. I would say that rather than likes and dislikes, how uncomfortable this episode made me.
And how would you put that on a scale, on a 1 to 10 scale?
Oh, I'd have to give it an 8 on a discomfort level. The prejudices, the Home Guard, the rhetoric. I I wonder if we would even, if the show were made today, if we would even see this episode or an episode like this aired.
I would hope so.
Well, one would.
Because I would hope so for one very simple reason. This kind of bigotry against someone different is one of the uglier parts of the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that's new.
Right.
It's not something that is necessarily racial, Hispanic or black. I mean, fine, before that it was the Irish.
Oh, yeah.
I know that from my grandfather on my mother's side, when he was some of the stories when he was running rum during Prohibition era that I had heard.
Oh.
So it's one of the uglier parts of the human condition.
Yeah.
On my end, I don't think it made me as uncomfortable as it made you, insofar that there were enough parts that I've lived that the way I look at it, I can whine and I can get offended and I can poor me and I can run to other people and scream, "See how mean that person is," like you see so much of today.
Mm-hmm.
Or I can take that and use it to make me strong. And for myself, at least, that's what I chose to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a huge fan of Nietzsche, but this for me personally in my journey, it became, even at 8 years old, it became a case of that which doesn't kill me makes me strong.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back on it, again, and I'm sort of sounding like Mayan here, I guess, in a way. In some ways, those experiences have a great deal of responsibility for what I've ultimately ended up doing in life. That running out of, a lot more people are going to know the story now, I guess, because there's only, up until this point, probably only a handful have ever heard it.
Mm-hmm.
When that den leader eventually ended up with cancer, I cheered a little bit, but it also had an influence on my, at that time, desire to go into medicine.
Ah.
Not in a positive way, mind you.
Mm-hmm.
Not in a positive way at all. It was what I had gone through, and this was still, junior high ages era that I had made that kind of a decision. It was through some of the other experiences that I had.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go ahead and use the words, having I don't know, probably 12, 15 kids walking behind me in the halls of junior high chanting "spick, spick, spick." Really hammered it home to me. It's like, wait, do I really want to be the thing that I hate? And between that and my faith, that kind of shifted that around, but it still set my feet on the path to my career. I ultimately turned away from medical school after 3 invitations because I decided I could do more if I was as comfortable in an engineering lab as I was in a cath lab or electrophysiology lab. But with still those events that set my feet on that. And now every time I walk into an airport or a public building and see a defibrillator hanging on the wall there, I'm looking at my work. Or technology that I helped to pioneer. So, yeah, there is an aspect of Nietzsche there, I guess, and that's where you see some of my lack of patience with people who I tend to be a little cold-shouldered toward people who have a thin skin.
See, and I have zero tolerance for racial bigotry. I have no tolerance for it.
Mm-hmm. Oddly enough, and I think again it's because of my life journey, I have immense tolerance. It could have made me an angry, bitter, mean person, and instead, people like that, someone like Malcolm, yeah, they might fill me with disgust, I will do anything in my power to stop the agenda or what they're trying to do. But the degree of compassion that I have for that person and their heart is overwhelming.
Uh-huh.
That doesn't mean I'm going to agree. Like I said, that doesn't mean I'm not going to resist them. That doesn't mean I am going to speak out openly, loudly, and publicly against them.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't take away my compassion for them or my pity for them.
Yeah. See, I know in the way that I deal with it, I know that it exists. I know that I can't single-handedly stop it. All I know is how I can conduct myself and how I can raise my kids. But I don't have to have it around me.
We're in agreement.
You know, you take, for instance, in my classroom,
Mm-hmm.
I heard the term raghead. And, you know, it's like, that's insane.
Yeah.
You know, it's horrible. You know, or the N-word, I've heard that a couple of times. And it's like, there's no place for that here.
No.
You know?
And you know what? You can disagree loudly, strongly, vehemently. You can stand unyieldingly against their religion or their belief. That's fine with me.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I will do everything in my power to defend your right to do so.
Yeah.
But don't take it down into the gutter.
No. Well.
Great episode. Great episode.
Where do we go from here?
Yeah. Well, I think we're probably going to get very close to a close point here. I will say this. This is what I like about Joe Straczynski. This is one of the best, single episode of a television series that I can think of that has really dealt so well with the issue of bigotry and the issues of hatred.
Make sure that gets on the end of this.
Huh?
Make sure that this gets on the end of this.
Oh, no worries. There's not going to be a whole lot that gets edited out of this.
Ah.
There won't be a whole lot that gets edited out. And I think after this discussion, it's going to be almost mandatory to pull in our ISN Inf0-Babe to read out the War Prayer, Mark Twain's story.
Now, I have a question for you.
That will be after the closing credits, folks. So once you hear the closing credits, hang on for a few moments.
Yeah.
You have a question for me, my friend.
Yeah, this is not part of our discussion. When I see your name, to me, it's pronounced Ibarra.
Actually, correctly pronounced is pronounced Ibarra.
Okay, well, my accent's horrible.
The Y is the Greek I, which has the E sound.
Right.
And the B is a very soft B that's almost a V.
So the Wybera
and of course
is
the
kind
trilled R.
Okay.
It's a Midwesternism.
So Wybera is an Americanized form.
Correct.
Okay.
The Y is an alternate spelling. My particular branch of the family in Mexico did spell it with the I, and if you've ever seen Ibarra chocolate, it's one of the better Mexican chocolates. Mexican hot cocoa is far and away the best hot cocoa you'll ever have. Remember, that's where it originated in antiquity.
Well, of course, yes.
Everyone's more familiar with Nestle, 8-sided cakes of hot cocoa, but Ibarra's definitely best. Now, there's an olive oil Ibarra that's spelled with a Y, the same as mine.
Ah, okay. I was curious about that.
Now, that's a Spanish olive oil, and I don't know a direct relation.
Oh, when I talk about our podcast, sometimes on other podcasts, I mispronounce your name.
For me, the way it came about, you know what? Get Raul close. Just don't call me Raul, and you can do whatever you want to the last name.
Okay. Well,
do you want to wrap up? Huh?
Yeah. Let's go ahead and wrap up.
Well, Jim, I had a great time as always with you tonight.
Yeah, it got really deep.
Get used to that. That's this show. Babylon 5 is a deep show. There's a lot of action, a lot of adventure, a lot of comedy, but boy, it's one of the deepest shows I've seen.
Yes.
Until next week, I guess 2 weeks, right?
Yep, 2 weeks.
Until 2 weeks. And that said, there's no boom today.
But there will be a boom tomorrow.
There's always a boom tomorrow.
Ah, yes, always.
Good night, friends.
Good night now.
Podcast terminated. The War Prayer by Mark Twain. It was a time of great and exalting excitement. The country was up in arms. The war was on. In every breast burned the holy fire of patriotism. The drums were beating, the bands playing, the toy pistols popping, the bunched firecrackers hissing and spluttering on every hand, and far down the receding and fading spread of roofs and balconies, a fluttering wilderness of flags flashed in the sun. Daily the young volunteers marched down the wide avenue, gay and fine in their new uniforms, the proud fathers and mothers and sisters and sweethearts cheering them with voices choked with happy emotion as they swung by. Nightly the packed mass meetings listened, panting, to every patriot oratory which stirred the deepest depths of their hearts, and which they interrupted at briefest intervals with cyclones of applause, the tears running down their cheeks the while. In the churches, the pastors preached devotion to flag and country and invoked the God of battles, beseeching his aid in our good cause in outpourings of fervid eloquence which moved every listener. It was indeed a glad and gracious time, and the half-dozen rash spirits that ventured to disapprove of the war and cast a doubt upon its righteousness straightway got such a stern and angry warning that for their personal safety's sake they quickly shrank out of sight and offended no more in that way. Sunday morning came. Next day the battalions would leave for the front. The church was filled. The volunteers were there, their young faces alight with martial dreams, visions of the stern advance, the gathering momentum, the rushing charge, the flashing sabers, the flight of the foe, the tumult, the enveloping smoke, the fierce pursuit, the surrender. Then home from the war, bronzed heroes, welcomed, adored, submerged in golden seas of glory. With the volunteers sat their dear ones, proud, happy, and envied by the neighbors and friends who had no sons and brothers to send forth to the field of honor, there to win for the flag, or, failing, die the noblest of noble deaths. The service proceeded. A war chapter from the Old Testament was read. The first prayer was said. It was followed by an organ burst that shook the building, and with one impulse the house rose, with glowing eyes and beating hearts, and poured out that tremendous invocation. God, the all-terrible, thou who ordainest, thunder thy clarion, and lightning thy sword. Then came the long prayer. None could remember the like of it, for passionate pleading, and moving and beautiful language. The burden of its supplication was that an ever-merciful and benignant Father of us all would watch over our noble young soldiers, and aid, comfort, and encourage them in their patriotic work. Bless them, shield them in the day of battle and the hour of peril. Bear them in his mighty hand, make them strong and confident, invincible in the bloody onset. Help them crush the foe. Grant to them and to their flag and country imperishable honor and glory. An aged stranger entered and moved with slow, noiseless step up the main aisle. His eyes fixed upon the minister, his long body clothed in a robe that reached to his feet, his head bare, his white hair descending in a frothy cataract to his shoulders, his seamy face unnaturally pale even to ghastliness. With all eyes following him and wondering, he made his silent way. Without pausing, he ascended to the preacher's side and stood there waiting. With shut lids, the preacher, unconscious of his presence, continued his moving prayer, and at last finished it with the words uttered in fervent appeal. Bless our arms! Grant us the victory, O Lord and God, Father and protector of our land and flag! The stranger touched his arm, motioned him to step aside, which the startled minister did, and took his place. During some moments he surveyed the spellbound audience with solemn eyes, in which burned an uncanny light. Then, in a deep voice, he said, "I come from the throne, bearing a message from Almighty God." The words smote the house with a shock. If the stranger perceived it, he gave no attention. "He has heard the prayer of his servant, your shepherd, and will grant it if such be your desire, after I, his messenger, shall have explained to you its import. That is to say, its full import. For it is like unto many of the prayers of men, in that it asks for more than he who utters it is aware of, except he pause and think. God's servant and yours has prayed his prayer. Has he paused and taken thought? Is it one prayer? No, it is two, one uttered and the other not. Both have reached the ear of him who heareth all supplications, the spoken and the unspoken. Ponder this, keep it in mind. If you would beseech a blessing upon yourself, beware, lest without intent you invoke a curse upon your neighbor at the same time. If you pray for the blessing of rain on your crop which needs it, by that act you are possibly praying for a curse on some neighbor's crop, which may not need rain and can be injured by it. You have heard your servant's prayer, the uttered part of it. I am commissioned by God to put into words the other part of it, that part which the pastor, and also you in your hearts, fervently prayed silently, and ignorantly, and unthinkingly. God grant that it was so. You heard the words, "Grant us the victory, O Lord our God." That is sufficient. The whole of the uttered prayer is compact into those pregnant words. Elaborations were not necessary. When you have prayed for victory, you have prayed for many unmentioned results which follow victory, must follow it, cannot help but follow it. Upon the listening Spirit of God fell also the unspoken part of the prayer. He commandeth me to put it into words. Listen. Lord our Father, our young patriots, idols of our hearts, go forth into battle. Be thou near them, with them, in spirit. We also go forth from the sweet peace of our beloved firesides to smite the foe. O Lord our God, help us tear their soldiers to bloody shreds with our shells. Help us to cover their smiling fields with the pale forms of their patriot dead. Help us to drown the thunder of the guns with the shrieks of their wounded, writhing in pain. Help us to lay waste their humble homes with a hurricane of fire. Help us to wring the hearts of their unoffending widows with unavailing grief. Help us to turn them out roofless with their little children to wander unfriended in the waste of their desolated land in rags and hunger and thirst, sports of the sun flames in the summer and the icy winds of winter, broken in spirit, worn with travail, imploring thee for the refuge of the grave and denied it. For our sakes who adore thee, Lord, blast their hopes, blight their lives, protract their bitter pilgrimage, make heavy their steps, water their way with their tears, stain the white snow with the blood of their wounded feet. We ask it in the spirit of love, of him who is the source of love, and who is the ever-faithful refuge and friend of all that are sore beset and seek his aid with humble and contrite hearts. Amen. Ye have prayed it. If ye still desire it, speak. The messenger of the Most High waits. It was believed afterward that the man was a lunatic because there was no sense in what he said.
Thank you for listening to the Babylon Project podcast. You can email Raul and Jim at the Babylon Project podcast
@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook at the Babylon Project Podcast. On the internet, we are at babylonprojectpodcast.wordpress.com. To subscribe to the podcast, you can find us on iTunes, or you can subscribe to the RSS feed on the webpage.